good afternoon, and thank you very much for coming to this quick session on a subject that I feel very, very passionate about at the moment, and Leo are really taking as one of the central sort of cornerstones of everything we're doing in consulting and delivery of learning programs to our clients. So I'm going to talk about measurement and impact and measuring success. As I say, it's a topic close to my heart, so I could talk for hours on it, and for me, having to keep to half an hour is a real challenge. So I'm going to very, very briefly explain what the high-level measurement model is that we use as the basis for looking at everything we do. I'm going to explore what that feels like in the world of learning architectures and blends, which is very, very different to maybe 5-10 years ago, standing here talking about measurement, and what continuous measurement looks like as well, now that we have learning of all sorts coming to our learners in so many different ways all the time, 24/7. And end on just a few really interesting things that I and we are seeing in this area. So first of all, I'm going to start with a story that I just that tickles me, because I like statistics. Just after the war, there was an investigation into the problem of polio in the US, and researchers found that polio was a problem in late summer, as that correlated perfectly with ice cream sales, and therefore first indication was that polio had something to do with ice cream. Of course, later it was found out that it's to do with water and swimming pools, I believe, not being a microbiologist. But this just is an exemplar story of the difference in correlation and causation and, i.e. the problems of actually finding real evidential links between results and cause. And in our world of learning, which is about people and change and business, highly, highly complex, it is no doubt that people find it difficult to engage with. But there is no doubt that it's important. So I want to just ask you very, very quickly as a group, I'm going to ask you a question about measurement of your learning in your organizations. I'm going to ask you whether you are, first of all, you don't measure your learning, secondly, you do, and thirdly, you do it well, okay? So quickly, sort of hands up, people who don't measure their learning. A few. People who do measure their learning? Great. People who feel that they do it really well. Right, there we go. That's really interesting. And I think that we all understand that, which is probably why you're here, and why it is such a key issue. So I don't need to tell you why we measure. In fact, I always put compliance in here because we sometimes forget that there are a huge amount of what we do in our world is about just making sure we know who knows what in a compliance sense. But traditionally, measurement has been about proving value and benchmarking against ourselves and others. And in a business context, which is where a lot of us find ourselves working, it's about being able to show genuine return on investment for all the wonderful work we're doing. And as Leo, an organization that has this vision, which is moving learning to the heart of business strategy, it is really critical that we're able to show at a sort of board level or any level in an organization that the work we're doing and the work that our clients are doing is having a genuine impact on their businesses, on the strategy, on the way they're moving forward, and on the bottom line, which is the language of business. And it is our responsibility to deliver that visibly and clearly with every project we do. And that's what we feel strongly. But nowadays, there's another reason to measure. We are delivering highly blended programs. In fact, there's no program that I can think of that we're working on which is just one medium anymore. We no longer really deliver just e-learning courses. There's always a link to something else, if not a strong link to something else with blended learning components of resources or face-to-face or whatever. And the learning architectures we're delivering are getting more and more complex all the time. And we kind of work in a new world, I think. I find myself standing here every year saying, it's a new world, there's some great new tools we can use, and the power of kind of joining up mobile with formal, with mentoring and coaching, with resources and knowledge management and everything. It's just terribly exciting. But in this world, how do we know what is working? And we're working very much in an agile way, whether we like it or not, whether we're working officially in an agile way. We're trying things out. There are heroic corners of all of our organizations that are doing some really nice stuff, always. We need to know that they're working so that we can take them back to the board, take them back into the business strategies or the strategies of our learning teams and model them and work them up still more. So this is really, really important. I feel like 3-4 years ago we were sort of inventing what learning architectures are. Now we're very, very much verifying what's there and what works and how it works, and that is extremely important. So a word about the sort of basics of measurement. If I was stuck in a lift and you said, how do you do this? Well, there are 3 key questions we ask ourselves. Has it landed, which is the old question. Did it really get to people? Did they do it? Did they enjoy it? Did it go in? And so on and so on. That seems like a really obvious question, but if it's a campaign of some sort, and it's not necessarily a mandatory piece of learning or communications or communications, you need to know it's got to your audience. Has the behavior changed of the learners, which is the next most important question? So are they in fact doing something different? And you only really know whether they're doing something different when obviously they are doing it in the sort of heat of the moment, in their workplace. And then thirdly, and this is a very, very big question, is what's the business impact in whatever way, so that you can join one end of that process, which is us designing learning, with the other end, which is the ROI and the business impact. Traditionally, that would have looked like this. You have a learning event and you would do some measurement before, quite possibly some surveys or taking data of some sort from the learners or from the business, and then you do it afterwards. Fortunately, everyone's realized with knowledge drop-off and so on, there's no point in just measuring it 2 weeks after the learning. There is a point at which you need to know that the change is still in place, that people are still behaving in the way that you want them to, or still using the knowledge that you gave them here. And this becomes even more poignant in this sort of sustaining world of learning, always on. This is far more valuable than post-evaluation. This is where you know it's landed, but this is where you know that behaviors are changing. But this is where it really happens in this process, because without knowing what it is you're trying to do in a business or strategy context, you have no idea really whether you're successful at the other end. So there's no point in getting to here or just before here and putting in place a results and measurement and impact measurement strategy, because you're only going to get a quarter of the story as far as I'm concerned. This is where it happens. This is where you sit down before your program and you say, what exactly are we trying to do? Now there is another really poignant outcome of having this conversation at the beginning of a program, and that is you will unpack what it is you're really, really trying to do. And the outputs of these conversations that we have with our clients have a serious impact on the design solution that we then put in place, which cannot be underestimated. Looking at that, the 3 questions I asked in a little bit more detail, we use what we call the chain of evidence. Now this is based very strongly on the Kirkpatrick chain of evidence, with a few tweaks here and there based on pragmatic application of this over the years. So you can see the 3 main questions under here. So engagement, has it landed? Perceptions, did people like it? Effectiveness of the learning, did anyone learn? Did they understand? Did it do what it needed to do, which was there were a set of objectives putting across the problem, the solution, this and that and the other. Then behaviors, critically, are people then doing something differently following that intervention? Outcomes, have the bottom line measures changed, and that can be on focused on small groups of people or teams or in a larger sort of cohort context or an organizational context. And finally, if you can make it happen, what does that impact? How does that impact the money saved or units sold or profit or whatever? So, what does that look like? Well, here's a picture of a car seat. I asked our graphic designer for a picture of a car seat, and I got this. And I said, no, I want something much nicer, and then I got this. So the reason I have a picture there is that I'm going to just tell you a very, very quick story. A client we worked with some years back in the automotive industry, they released some vehicles with a problem somewhere in the seat mechanism at the front of the vehicle. And these vehicles had to be returned, the seat covers taken off, and the problem fixed. And that could all be done relatively quickly. The problem was the seat cover. In doing that, the people who were working in the workshops damaged the seat cover, which meant A, they had to put on a brand new seat cover, and B, it took them longer, and. So they came to us and said, we need an e-learning course really quickly to go out globally. We want to know everybody's done it. We want them very, very quickly to know how to take the seat cover off really carefully, fix the thing they need to fix, and put it back on. So we did it, and it was really successful. And we knew it was successful because we could see it from one end to the other. Did people like it? Well, we did get some feedback on what they felt about a very short e-learning module, a little bit of context, and a video. It could be shown strongly in video. Did anyone learn? Well, we did do a couple of little mini assessments just to make sure people had done that learning, which is kind of to do with the engagement, but also they were able to know that they'd got those key points in the process. But we also were able to, because of this perfect situation we were in, get straight to the managers of the workshops, and through observation and asking them in surveys and so on, we could tell that they were doing things differently. And they were able to say, yes, all those people who did that learning are now not requiring brand new seat covers, and they can do it much faster without damaging everything. So have the bottom line measures changed? Yes, we had numbers because we could see that the vehicles were being fixed much more quickly, and the ROI was a glorious moment when somebody was able to say, and because of that, we're saving all of this spend that we would have incurred. Now, that was a wonderful kind of perfect moment in the measurement world, and that doesn't come along very often. As I said at the beginning, it's highly complex what we do. But now I'm just going to step outside of my story and tell another story. A quick word about surveys. I just like this, and I know that anybody involved in measurement is going to be involved in surveys. So I just wondered if any of you know what these three activities have in common. Tennis, chess, driving. Well, I'll tell you. They are all situations where people overestimate their skills. Okay. And it's called the Dunning-Kruger effect. And I just like it because somebody's done the research on this, and deep down we all know it's true. If you ask somebody who plays tennis, chess, how good they are, if they're not very good, they'll always think they're better than they are. They'll always say they're better than they are. If they're very good, they'll always say they're not that good. Skiing is another one, I think. Driving is another one. People always think they're better drivers than they really are. But this is, in fact, quite an important piece of research because a lot of surveys go out to do with what we do. And you have to know that if you're asking somebody that question, the context in which they're answering it, and make sure you're correlating the data you're getting against who they are and what the likely levels they are. Another example is if you asked a brain surgeon whether they knew anything about how the brain works, they'd say no. And if you asked an A-level student or an O-level student, they'd say, yes, it's synapses. So, you know, we're all probably all somewhere in between, but you have to know the context in which you're working. Anyway, that's just one example of the complexity of what we do. So when we put together a survey, we are always thinking about this and whether there is some leveling we need to do according to the audience that we are putting this to. So what about something much more complex like delivering quality engagements in a big consultancy firm? How on earth can we apply something as perfect and pure as the car seat situation to this? How are we going to know when people are doing it? Well, it may be, for instance, something like following procedure and process, that there is a process in place within that organization, and we need to find ways of seeing whether people are actually doing that, whether they are logging into the right pages of a website or pulling down the right documents and using them in the right way. So that could be sort of QA, it could be process tracking. Are they talking to other people where appropriate? That could be done by observation or asking peers. Time spent on doing things, are they reinventing the wheel? That could be a way of finding out whether they're following the process properly. Observation is very important when it comes to these sort of softer areas of behavioral change. And it could be to do with communication styles and so on. And then business shifts as you get towards the right-hand side of that evidence chain. You know, are you getting repeat business? Things like net promoter scores, client satisfaction, staff satisfaction, really important. People, are they happy with what they're doing, or are they feeling highly stressed because they haven't got the right tools and processes in place? Bottom line, KPIs like profit, time, revenue, opportunity growth, reduced escalations. Always think about the flip side of any change and measuring the counterfactual, if you like, to get your results. So it is complex, but you need to sit down and think about what good looks like and what the from picture is. What are people going to be doing for you to know that they're doing the right thing and behaving in the right way? Which sort of brings me to the learning architecture point. So in a world of blended learning where delivering quality engagements is you know, maybe there's a course or program at the heart of it, I don't know, but there could be e-learning and there could be PDFs to read and there could be mentoring and so on and so on. How do you measure that? And the real challenges are to do with massive complexity. There could also be the fact that learning is coming from outside of the organization. One of the big things we're dealing with all the time at the moment is aggregation of learning into organizations where, you know, we're combining TED Talks and YouTube content and I don't know, anything from universities from anywhere that a learning department may want to bring in. Great idea. But how can you possibly start to see how that's affecting your people and then discount that from the learning program that you may have designed? Coaching and mentoring, which is a hard topic. It's so soft. How do you line that up with the results you're getting? And also, in a world where we're always trying to make our learning more personalized, how can you measure one person against another? When one person, if this is the world we want to be in, one person has gone through this learning program here to get to where they need to get to, and the other person started and went down here because their particular experience or area of the business is different. So how could you go about kind of lining that up? They're not all going through the same course in how to set their computer up right or something. There are lots of different solutions to this, and I'd be really happy to talk to anybody about it if you come and find me afterwards. On a technical level, we now have learning record stores, and one of our a partner within the Learning Technology Group, which is what Leo is part of, is Rustisi now, and they have been leading the field in SCORM and now Tin Can XAPI, and also a sister organization that we are involved with is Watershed, who are a learning record store specialist. Watershed is an LRS. And that enables us to begin to measure people's engagement with lots and lots of different content, not just e-learning in the old sense, traditional sense, but take data from all sorts of different engagements and content and assets. And what that gives us, I believe, is the ability to look closely at how single things have been landing and impacting learners and how they behave. And also how, if you put them all together, you begin to see patterns, hopefully more effective than polio and ice cream. But looking at things in the right way, you're beginning to see the patterns that make up shifts in your business and how they work. And the other thing that I think is important is, and I'll say this again in a second, is focus back on the learner. In fact, sometimes you can get too tied up in all of the data. Remember to go back to what you want, how you want the learner to change, and maybe look at how you can see that happening in a broader sense. A quick word about learning, the Learning Record Store, and I'll just tell you a quick story about this, because I told this to Charles Jennings the other day, who's the sort of father of 70-20-10, as you know, and he hadn't heard this story, and he said, now that all makes sense. So a piece of work that Watershed have been doing is with a medical health organization in the US around the topic of defibrillation and defibrillation training. And what they did was bring together, for the first time, a number of data streams in a really very, very interesting way. So they had an LMS that in fact had a lot of data about what people were learning formally about defibrillation and how to respond to what's called a code blue situation, which is a defibrillation situation. So they had the LMS content in a kind of traditional format. They also had a simulator, an actual simulation sort of suite where people had to go in, and there was a very complex sort of dummy with paddles and everything else, and lots of measurement and data that coming out of that, and they were able to extract that as well into Watershed. They had in-person observation from the hospital. They had a mobile app that observers were able to use while these things were happening, and they could either be set up simulations in the hospital, or they could be real, actual defibrillation code blue situations, and observers were able to quickly answer questions on an app which fed the data directly into Watershed. And finally, the code blue metrics from the hospital itself of exactly how quickly the patients were coming through the door and how quickly they were getting to certain steps of the process, and also how many were surviving, I suppose. So for the very, very first time, they were able to take some really, really critical data that up until that point had been separate and plot it against itself and against learners, begin to see where the learning was successful, in what order the learning was successful. If you did the e-learning 6 months ago and then you did the defibrillator simulation, or the other way around, and so on and so on. And the data's still coming through, or actually just beginning to come through, but it's going to save lives. And as I say, I told this to Charles Jennings, and he said, that is what I've been waiting to hear about XAPI and TIMCAN, that kind of story that I can now kind of tell. So continuous measurement, what does that look like? Well, as I say, in a world of a learning architecture where people are picking up their learning from different places all the time, it's repeated, it's linked to business KPIs, it's the big dashboard, the giant version of the code blue, if you like. It's heat maps of who's learning what and where is that taking the business. The risks, by the way, are that you look at people's progress, not their performance, and you don't go back to the learner. So my advice is always go back to what the learner is really doing and where you need them to be going. Big data analysis, which is the exciting, everybody's talking about big data. It can kind of take over. So that's really what I was just saying there. and be careful how you intervene with learners in measurement, because they can get a bit tired of being surveyed. I mean, we all know that. That's what it's like. So finally, in the last couple of minutes, I'm just going to tell you a couple of things that I'm hearing and that we're involved in as well in the world of measurement. As I say, this has been a really quick jump around, but there are some interesting things going on. So one big question you may have read about is, can we use social networks to measure network learning? So I really like the fact that when people started to think about how are we going to measure social learning and the learning that we're building into programs where we're requiring learners to connect with one another and do things in groups and so on and so on and so on. And the suggestion was that use social media channels themselves to measure with, which is great. It's great in many respects. The first one being that you're getting right to people when they're applying the learning, which has always been a big problem. You know, as I said, have behaviours changed? At the beginning, I said, you know, in our chain of evidence, have behaviours changed? And you only know that when people are actually doing it. Well, people are picking up their phones all the time and sharing their experiences, so they may be encouraged to share their work experience as and when they're using the learning, which is great. And as they apply the learning and as they start to learn from it and effectively teach other people. The downside is, though, that you've got to be careful who you're talking to, because you may only be talking to a few people who use these networks in organizations. So it's all very well to come up with something really clever at that end and then realize that you're talking to the top 10% of technologists in your organization who are all the kind of people that are going to go out and learn everything they need to know on their own anyway. Something that is definitely happening across the board is the use of observation. Now, it could be through things like apps, as I said. You know, we're looking at ways of getting information on learner behaviors all the time, new ways and different ways. And observation has always been the traditional way of doing this, and then it kind of disappeared. Thankfully, it is back with a vengeance, and I don't see any good impact study on a learning intervention that doesn't involve some form of observational data coming in, and in certain circumstances making sure that people are behaving in the right way in the workplace. And closely linked to that is the role of the line manager. So the role of the line manager is critical in every learning program that we design now. It's one of our kind of checklist moments at the beginning of a strategic design for a client, is what's the manager doing? What is the manager doing at the beginning? What are they doing while the learner's learning, and what are they doing afterwards to make sure the learner is applying their business? So we're always looking at the manager now in terms of their role in the learner's experience, but make sure you use the manager in the results gathering as well. So this goes back to the social networks. It sounds a bit scary, but there is a sort of idea, and I think that Watershed and Learning Record Stores now are enabling us to put in place something that we've been talking about for a while, which is how can you see what people are thinking about and talking about in your organization? Because if you're in a big oil and gas type organization and this is at the top of your agenda and you're rolling out all the time big programs and campaigns of learning on the subject of risk or health and safety or code of conduct or ethics, how do you know that people are engaging with it? And one way is to see what they're talking about. And one of the closest ways, short of kind of running around the organization with your ears flapping, is to see what the chatter is, if you like, within an organization. And finally, Learning Record Stores and our colleagues at Watershed are able to actually put in place systems like this. Now, it feels a bit freaky, listening in on people, but you can just sort of pick out the occurrence of words, phrases, or so on within an organization. And so very finally, my view, I have to say, is that whatever we do in the world of measurement and results and impact and measuring impact, just let's make sure we give that back to the learner, because it's very easy for us to sort of keep it in an L&D department and use it for our own means, which we need to do. But let's feed it back to the learner, because the kind of dashboards that they need to have in order to see what their progress is are really critical. So I'm just going to ask again, if there's anybody has a reflection on their measurement, although the intention I had was that all those people who put up their hands for number 3 and said, yes, we're doing it really well, might now be rethinking whether they were any good at it. So in fact, I'm not going to ask the question. I hope that this has triggered some thinking in your minds about measurement and how important it is, and some of the things that are going on. If you want to come and ask me questions, or any of my colleagues at Leo, we're standing just over here, and we have two things that you can come and ask for, and we will send you, or you can log in and get. One is the Towards Maturity report that is out just in the last day or so, making an impact, which we've been deeply involved in. And there's a lot of data that supports everything I've been saying here, and some really nice ideas as well. And also a white paper based on this talk I've just done, but with much more about the chain of evidence and so on and so on. So if you want either of those, then do come to the stand or visit our website, and you will find them. Thank you very, very much for your time.